Welcome to the Page Two podcast. I'm John Clark, joined as always by my co-host and partner in crime at Moving Traffic Media, Joe DeVita. Our guest today is the kind of person you might call a digital renaissance man, part SEO innovator, part rapper, part agency builder, and now a major conference host. He's the founder of iPullRank, an agency known not just for great results, but for pioneering new frameworks like Relevance Engineering, which I hope to talk about a little bit today, and always pushing boundaries in SEO. I've known Mike King for more than 10 years. And it's fair to say he's never been short on ideas, energy, or the ability to move the industry forward with a controversial opinion. It's been way too long since we've had the chance to sit down and really dig into the weeds. So today's conversation promises to be a fun, no filter ride. But before we jump into our conversation with Mike, just a quick reminder, if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. It really helps us keep delivering great content. Welcome to the show, Mike. Before we dive in, why don't you give our listeners your official elevator pitch? Who you are, what you do, why you do
Yeah, I'm Mike King and I do relevance engineering, which is a
it.
function of content strategy, artificial intelligence, information retrieval, UX, and digital PR.
It's awesome. Um, I had this whole idea of like asking a whole bunch of questions that I've always wanted to know, just sort of knowing you this long. And then both Joe and I independently watched the video yesterday, sort of the future of search with you and Garrett Sussman, and we sort of left that conversation. Our heads were sort of spinning. One of our SEO directors was also at Google I/O, and she sort of came back with this sort of like sense of, I don't know if despair is the right word, but I sort of like picked it up in your tone as well a little bit
Almost
in that
overwhelmed,
conversation.
a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, like just unsettled maybe is a better word. And so I almost want to shift the conversation, not necessarily as a part two of that, but maybe a part two, and really just sort of dive in a little bit more on the outcome of Google I/O and sort of what that means for our future in this industry. And one thing that really sort of struck me was the comment by one of the Google folks that was basically like, continue to create great content. Oh, and make sure it's really unique. And then there's sort of this flip side of, on the publishing side, the free exchange of sort of clicks for content has sort of gotten blown up, right? And so, like, how do you see that evolving? Like, what is the incentive now for publishers to continue to create that unique content when they're not getting clicks and returns? That makes sense. Like, I feel like that's like
Yeah,
we all know so many people in publishing. It's just such a tough thing to swallow.
yeah, I don't really have an answer for people that are in publishing aside from like diversify your traffic mix. Like, you don't, you're not going to get as many clicks. And it's not to say that you won't get any clicks, but you should probably focus more on Google Discover and Google News and things like that rather than, standard organic. And that feeling of despair, like, is real, right? Like, that's how I felt the after the first day of IO, even though I was around some great SEOs and talked to some engineers and had some great conversations, I felt, kind of like existential dread, not for myself specifically, but for our industry, because our industry is not ready. Like, what am I going to do? Go log into like one of these SEO tools that doesn't do anything to support where we're going? And so it's really a really frustrating situation, but that also means that there's a lot of opportunity to help one define it and also figure out like where are the edges that we can play in. And so I've been doing a lot of research on the idea of reasoning and how you can appear when a model does reasoning. And, to some degree, it is still like semantic triples and structuring your content in certain ways. But I think we need more of, like I showed at SEO week, we have this like AIO simulator where it's like, cool, you put your content in, you see how it would be perceived by these sorts of mechanisms, and then you can make adjustments based on how it reacts to your content. So I think ultimately that is where we're going to need to play more in. And one of the big concepts that they talked about is this query fan out technique, which is where they
Right.
generate a bunch of these synthetic queries and they run them in the background. And so I think the place where we need to start as an industry is like, cool, how do we understand what those queries can be? Because those queries aren't necessarily just a function of like, what are users doing? It could be what the model itself thinks is a good subquery for this query. So I think this is all like replicable to some degree. But the problem is we won't necessarily have a good feedback loop to say, like, are these the right synthetic queries? Which means there's just going to have to be a lot of testing to figure that sort of stuff out. So there's a lot that we can do here as far as like research and understanding and so on. But I don't think any of that is really SEO as it's been historically defined.
Do you think that query fan out um, like research project is an evolution of a standard keyword research that an SEO team might do?
I mean, it could be, but it requires a skill that most SEOs don't have because it's not just like looking up and identifying keywords. It's also looking at what ranks for those keywords and then breaking down those pages into vector embeddings to figure out, like, okay, which of these components is most relevant to the synthetic keyword. So there's no tooling to allow you to do that. Like, yes, if one of these SEO tools gave you some sort of like matrix tool wherein you put in the keyword and then it identifies the subqueries and then it pulls all that data for you and then allows you to like edit things, then sure, then I guess it's SEO. But because that doesn't exist and we've got to like figure this stuff out, we're still in a space where we're talking about engineering to get to a space where we can actually optimize for this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think your background as a technologist sort of sets you up well for this sort of, I don't know, evolution in the space. But I'm curious, like, you had a great picture on LinkedIn of sort of like SEO row, right, at Google I/O. I'm curious for others that were there, like, what were their reactions in the room? Was it similar to yours? Was it, even deeper despair, just sort of maybe not understanding the technological connections of how you might tackle something like this, or just sort of curious, like what.
Yeah, I don't know what everyone else's reaction was really. Like, I think we were all just kind of taking it in.
Hmm.
And, like my feeling of existential dread was just like me sitting with it after I left dinner with everybody. I think we were all just kind of kicking around ideas and reacting to some of the discussions we had with different Google engineers and things like that. But I don't think we had collectively drawn conclusions yet. But, a lot of the people that were there were also very technical. Like we had like Brittany Muller was there, JC was there, like all people that talk about like Python SEO. So I think that there's going to be, a lot that comes from the group that was there. That's going to be the things that a lot of us look at to say, okay, here's where we go moving forward.
Yeah, I remember, I guess about I don't know, year and a half ago at Brighton. I think we were concerned at that time about like what's the best tool that can actually report against AIO results. And I think you mentioned Nozzle at the time. I'm curious, like how are you thinking about tools in this future space? Like the traditional ranking reports, I think are quickly getting blown up, right? In terms of a way to really evaluate like visibility. So what does that
Yeah.
mean for tool sets?
Yeah, so as far as AIO specifically, I feel like Profound does the best job. And I think, all the other ranking tools are doing something similar. But I think what Profound is doing is thinking less about ranking and more about like citations, visibility, share of voice, things like that. And also giving you that data directly so you can see what was actually there. And then after that, I think zip tie is probably the second best. And probably the better option if you're like, an SMB or something like that. But from my perspective, I feel like Profound is really leading the way. And a big reason for that is they're not SEO guys, they're engineering guys. So they're solving the
Right.
problem without the context of SEO and they're not limited by what the space has historically been doing. So they're looking at what's state of the art, whereas in SEO we keep leaning on like what came before, and this idea that SEOs can only really deal with like a score out of 100 or out of 10, and optimizing towards that. So I think that rank tracking in the AI mode space doesn't even make sense because we're talking about personal context, we're talking about memory, we're talking about reasoning, and so on. So every given user will likely have very different results. So, rank tracking, I mean, if we take a step back, rank tracking itself kind of doesn't make sense either because you're trying to do this like depersonalized version of the ranking, which is a function of like you send a machine and act like it's first day on the internet, and the first thing that it does is search for your query so that there's no like user context, and you try to, limit the location based personalization as well. So you
Exactly.
kind of look at either United States or the centroid of a city or something like that. And that's nobody's user context. So it's like it's artificial to begin with. So I think that there needs to be, a new look at like how we do measurement in general, because we're not getting anything from GSC, at least not now. And that also kind of begs the question of like, what should Google Search Console be? And that's something I've been thinking about, pretty heavily. I'm like, well, maybe I should just write about like what it is that we would want as SEOs and relevance engineers and so on, because some of those reports don't make any sense. Like, when is the last time you've ever looked at that links report and used it
Right.
for something? You know what I mean? Or think about the crawl data reports, right? Like, it's just telling you the volume of crawls. What would you even do with that? So there's so many aspects that are like, and I was having a conversation with a Google engineer. I was like, when are you guys gonna get some real resources on this thing? Like it's clearly the last product in the organization that you guys are thinking about. And then they're like, well, it's free. We don't get any money out of it. I'm like, well, Google Analytics is free. Before GA4 was a thing, GA was a great product. It was like
Awesome.
it was an awesome product that gave you all the information that you needed. And, when you think about some of the obvious features that GSC should have, like I think we just got annotations like a couple months ago. Why was that not one of the first things they put in the product? So yeah, I don't think we're ready for most of this. We're not ready on a measurement perspective. We're not ready with the tool set. We're not ready with the strategic thinking either.
So maybe to transition into the reporting side, I think, what is the KPI now? Is it impressions, like to sort of lean into the, SEO as a brand channel sort of thing? And I think you had a comment somewhere where, if someone does a search for a pair of Nike shoes and Nike shows up, even if they don't necessarily get the click, that impression is still, there's still value in that, right? So
Yeah.
is,
My point was more that not if you're searching for Nike shoes, if you're searching for, the one I keep using is best basketball shoes for someone with flat feet, right? Like the non-branded term, and then you show up in the AI overview or even the featured snippet, and it says Nike Air Max 90 or something. Probably not that, because those definitely not basketball shoes. But anyway, if your brand shows up there for that non-branded term and a user doesn't click, that is still a brand impression. That's no different from, someone scrolling through their Facebook feed and they see an ad for these sneakers, and they may not click on that, but when they go to the store, they may say like, hey, I heard these shoes were great. Like, there's a aspect of mind share that we don't think about in SEO because we just don't really respect the idea of impressions. But impressions is how pretty much every advertising channel works. And of course they drive clicks, they drive conversions as well, but those are secondary things for the brand channels. So what I'm saying is that search has always been a brand channel. We just haven't taken the credit for that. And now it is more of a brand channel because there's less clicks through to websites. That's not to say that there aren't clicks to websites. It's not to say that there won't be conversions. There still will be. It's just going to probably become like, 70% of a performance channel and 30% a brand awareness channel.
got it. I'm curious, like, are you having these conversations with clients now? What's the reception on sort of that shift? Because I think one of the challenges with our industry in general is we've sort of trained people who are reviewing reports to like look at an individual keyword ranking, which has always been like not the best way to evaluate things, or some other metric that isn't perfectly tied to what's actually attributable to SEO. So what's been the feedback from clients as you're starting to nudge them even further down this path?
Yeah, we actually started with this probably at the top of the year because, once we saw how things were progressing with AI overviews, we were like, we got to raise the flag here because,
Right.
clients are, like you said, they're measuring based on traffic, they're measuring based on rankings and so on, share of voice and all that. And when they see these measures going down, if you don't have the story for like what's happening here, So, we had to get ahead of it because Google wasn't giving us it. Like, I feel like the right thing that I've done here would have been for Google to say, hey, search behavior is changing because of this thing that we're rolling out, like a usability study or just some sort of white paper that was like, things are changing. But we didn't have that. So we effectively had to create it ourselves from what we're seeing across clients, what we're seeing across, our the space in general and so on. And we were warning clients up front and we were saying, hey, branding is a thing here. Here's how you get in the AI overviews. So we proactively put that in front of people. And so with the launch of AI mode, we've been, kind of doing the same thing and saying like, hey, here's what Google is showing us. Here's how user behavior is changing. But the reaction has kind of been slow, right? It's been like, well, what do we do to get traffic in the meantime? Because we are still in a space where traffic is still being driven.
Right.
So how do we do that? And it's largely been like, how do we go more to the mid funnel queries or the lower funnel queries and improving our rankings there? And luckily, I predicted this 2 years ago, right? Like there was a blog post I wrote where I talked about how AI mode work, or some AI overviews work, and I predicted that there would be like a redistribution of search volume. And then I also talked about like here's how we mitigate. So first step is like seeing do your keywords have AI overviews on them? Excuse me. Which keywords don't? And then figuring out like do we actually need to be in the AI overview because we want that brand awareness, or do we want to rebalance our keyword set to go after the keywords that don't have them? So it's something I've been saying to clients for a while, but they've been like, cool, 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 cool. When we get there, we'll deal with
You had a great
it.
quote, Mike. You had this quote about you got to live for the moment, but plan for the minute. And I think that's a
Yeah,
good summary of what you're saying. It's like organic traffic is still very important today, but it's going to become less and less important every month into the year we go. And 12 months from now, it's going to look completely different. So we have to
yeah,
parallel things have to happen. We've got to hold on to what we have, organic traffic today, but we have to plan for something else that's inevitable, right? And it's coming at us
absolutely.
fast.
Absolutely. I would be shocked if next year at IO they didn't say like AI mode is now the primary version of search. And even if they don't do that, they've been very clear in like the documentation around AI overviews and AI mode, saying like, hey, the things that we pilot in AI mode, we are ultimately going to bring to core search as well. So either way, it's going to be a dramatically different environment in a year from now.
My wife Jamie works in this industry as well, and she works in house, so maybe a little bit easier for her to sort of drive how reporting goes. But probably about 6 months ago, she shifted the way that they evaluate traffic into paid traffic and non-paid traffic. So
Mhm.
direct, organic, right, referral, basically everything that's not in trackable from a paid perspective. And I think that's one way to maybe start thinking about this, especially with the recent news that Google's not passing any refer data. So it sort of comes in as direct traffic. And, how do you even get attributed for SEO in that scenario? Like you can't. And so you almost have to think about maybe a larger bucket of content, sorry, larger bucket of traffic to be able to sort of show where that traffic's coming in from. So that might be one way to, think through how to break that traffic out into more digestible formats.
Two things. One, I love that approach because, it makes you think more about like the channels and the interplay between them rather than being like, oh, well, this channel is dying. Well, so if you're getting a whole lot from social or a whole
Exactly.
lot from email or whatever, then you're net zero and it's fine, right? Like as long as it's still performing traffic. And the other thing is that John Mueller said yesterday that the no refer thing is a bug. So hopefully that will change. But right now, again, we just have no visibility into what this thing does. And it's going to be difficult to get investment if you can't prove what it's going to drive.
Yeah, I saw John Mueller's comment as well, and I'll take it at face value until it's real. But going back to the comments around Google Search Console, if, say, in 12 months, the entire experience is AI mode and they're not reporting on that information in Google Search Console today, like, does Google Search Console exist in 12 months?
I mean, I think it'll still exist because, uh, because like they will probably still give us like the performance, the query data or whatever for whoever is using that for whatever they're using it for. But I suspect that we will see some changes to GSC. It's probably not going to be what we want, but I suspect we will get something that's more reflective of what is actually happening. And there were a couple allusions to there being changes to GSC coming, but again, it just wasn't clear at all that it's going to be something we could actually use for what we need to do.
Got it. So I guess maybe to transition into relevance engineering, is that sort of a an answer to maybe some of this, loss in traffic, right? Sort of thinking about things much more holistically, or sort of how do you position that as a service to clients? Again, it's always hard to train an industry towards something new, and so I'm just really curious about how you approach that.
I don't know that I'm trying to train the industry towards something new. Like, I think that we will always have people that are just going to be like, oh, it's just SEO and what have you.
Hmm.
And I think that, those people will adapt small things to try to remain relevant and so on. But for me, I think it needs to be like a wholesale rethink of all of this. And I also think that the interplay between search channels is going to be really important, right? Like, chat GPT, perplexity to AI mode to classic organic or discover, like all these things have different mechanisms that you need to understand in order to get more visibility into them. And ultimately, what ties it all together is the idea of relevance, right? Like measuring what is relevant for a user, what their user interactions tell you about relevance, and also just the actual relevance of content to queries. So for me, it's like, okay, there's a lot missing from what SEO needs to be doing based on what we know. Like, think about all the stuff we've learned about Google in the last year, from the DOJ antitrust trial testimony, the leaked documents that I covered almost a year ago today. Um, Actually, yeah, it was like a year ago today when I got the documents. And then, also the exploit that Mark Williams Cook found, where you could see like all the IR metrics and so on. So I can't, in good conscience, go back to just like, oh, it's content links and 301s when we have so much information about the telemetry of how this works. And so, from my perspective, it isn't about SEO, because SEO is just like an abstraction. Like, when you do SEO, you're really just like a power user of Google. And you're like, okay, I know how to, do my site colon searches. And I know, like, when I do this thing, Google does this. But modern search requires more knowledge than that from my perspective, right? Like, you've got to understand how large language models work. That's not SEO. That's AI. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to sell you my knowledge of AI for the cost of SEO. It doesn't make any sense. So this is also like bigger picture thinking than I've seen the SEO community really be like capable of. Like, SEO is not a strategic industry. It's like it's super tactical. It's like, oh, okay, well, tell me the 5 steps I need to do this thing. Otherwise, no one is happy about your talk, right? Like, this idea of being more of a branding channel and less of a performance channel is a strategic change in how we need to approach this stuff. And there's going to be a lot of pushback on that from our community, because they don't want to do anything different. They don't want to have to be like, oh, well, impressions matter, when they spent 25 years saying that they don't. So if you're thinking about this in the context of how businesses operate, they are going to say, okay, well, here's the top layer of how we're trying to accomplish this thing. And then what tools do we use to accomplish the thing? As SEO is just like, okay, well, what levers do we pull to be number one? And it's a bigger idea than that. We need to be thinking about, I mean, what is the interplay across these surfaces for the user? How do you tie all this together? Because so many users will, yes, maybe start in ChatGPT, but then go to Google or vice versa. And being able to figure out the ways to tie all this together isn't something you can do by just sitting in your silo of SEO. So relevance engineering is like, cool, how do we like look at this across everything, and also position ourselves to have the right level of control of things to be effective. Whereas SEO is always like, hey, UX guys, can we talk? Like, no, I want to come into the discussion and be like, here's how you do UX for this environment. Not like, oh, well, I got to talk to this person and talk to this person and talk to this person. And then 6 months go by and then something new rolls out and we never got the opportunity to make something happen.
Mike, is SEO a piece of relevance engineering, or is relevance engineering just like optimizing for AI?
No, I think that, again, like SEO, like the way it's defined is smaller than what I'm talking about. Like I'm more talking about information retrieval, which is of course the computer science behind what search engines are doing. And so rather than saying like, well, Google's guidelines say this and da 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 da, I'm more like, well, based on how this systems function, it is likely looking at X, Y, and Z. And so we need to manipulate A, B, and C in order to do this thing. So I'm never going to be the person that's going to be like, oh, it depends. I'm going to be the person that says, well, based on how this system works, these are our three options. And I feel like that has been way more effective in doing what I do than, just heavily leaning on what Google has defined about how things work. So as an example, Google put out 2 documents of guidance in the last couple of days where they basically said like, hey, create great content and use structured data. Like that's not enough for me. What is more valuable to me is understanding the concepts behind query fan out so that we can replicate that and then we can have something actionable to do across a series of keywords to then create like a surround sound situation where no matter where Gemini goes, it is going to run into my content. So it doesn't have so many options when it's generating its response. And again, it's not defined in SEO yet. Whereas I'm able to say, based on what I understand by how this system works, this is a tactic that I believe will work based on, the technical underpinnings of this system.
Almost like this has to work because this is how the machine works. So you're sort
Exactly.
of, it's no longer it depends, to your point. It's like this is literally how it works, and we're
Hmm.
just applying things to that process. I think I think that is scary for a lot of people, right? Because they're working off the same checklist or the same process that they've developed, and that's how they've scaled up to, 150 clients that they charge $50 a month for. You know what I mean? And so now, that process gets blown up. So maybe that is definitely a good thing. I'm curious, like how. So I think one of the things that you've been known for historically has always been like obviously very technical, but especially being able to come in and execute a technical audit for, an enterprise level company, right? A whole bunch of different websites all working together. I'm curious how you guys are thinking about technical audits in this age, right? So does your technical audit now include like a UX component, or has it always?
It definitely hasn't always. It definitely does now, though. But the UX stuff we more discuss on our content strategy side.
Got it.
And I think one of the mistakes that I made was talking about the technical stuff too much because we actually do way more content stuff at i4 Inc. than we
Yeah.
do technical. I'd say it's probably like a 60-40 split. But nevertheless, when we do our audits, historically it's been technical content, linking, page speed, mobile usability, and then user interactions. But again, it's more like the UX and content strategy stuff where we really dig into that. We'll highlight the problems in our audits, but more on those the crux side where we're saying like, okay, here's what to do on a granular level. And we're really just starting to expand what that offering is because historically it's been like, well, you're not the UX guy. We'll shift this over to them and they'll discuss it. And what I'm saying now is like, no, we need to be able to make changes on the UX side. Otherwise, SEO is not going to work, right? Like, because we have a lot more clarity around the fact that Google does use user interaction signals to reinforce what should rank. I think that's going to come into play a lot more with these RAG models behind AI mode and AI overviews because they have to figure out like which of these pages should we be considering more than others when so many of them are saying the same information so they can figure out like which ones to actually cite. So I don't think we can reliably make these channels work without UX being like a germane component to it.
You're already shifting your deliverables based on what you've uncovered in the last 6, 12 months. Your
Yeah.
deliverables have changed. They're no longer the classic. It's not like our industry is like 20 years old now. We all do technical audits and content audits and linked audit, but they're
Mhm.
going to become less meaningful over time. We're going to have to create new deliverables. We're going to have to sell new types of work to clients to be relevant. I feel I'm excited about the agency business. I think we get into it because we like solving problems. I'm more worried about the tool sets that we rely on because they don't exist yet. I feel like
Hmm.
we as agencies will figure out how to make ourselves relevant and help clients, but without having a tool set to rely on is the part that I'm struggling to wrap my head around.
Yeah, my fear is that, you know, the SEO software industrial complex is not gonna react fast enough because they have their roadmaps for the reasons that they have them. And if you look at what they've been doing for the last couple years, they haven't been like improving the products. They've just been slapping ChatGPT on top of the existing products. Like, when is the last time a link index has given us something new and meaningful about the link graph? And last year we learned specifically that Google applies a sliding scale of link authority, not just based on page rank, but where the page lives in the layer of the index. So if it lives in the fresh docs, which I'm assuming is like the big publishing sites, then that's like a higher value. If it lives in the top tier, which is in memory, which means that it's like being accessed a lot, it ranks very highly, likely driving a lot of traffic, it's driving the most link equity. And then there's like two other tiers as well. And so we can use proxies like how many page one rankings does a page get, or how much traffic does it get, to determine where it likely lives in the index. But there has been no like new metrics around it. It's been a whole year. But instead, they're like, cool, let me give you more chat GPT and our bad data. I don't understand why we are so behind. And, I keep harping on the fact that Google, excuse me, has been doing both semantic and hybrid retrieval for a number of years now. And none of our tools are aligned with that. So it's like you are optimizing around an obsolete way of how search works. So like we are just so behind, and I think it's just going to require some new player in the same way that Profound is coming in, where they're like, "Cool, forget all that. What is the best technology we can build for us to be able to level up?" So I don't know. Maybe it have to be me. Maybe I got to build my own software for that.
I mean, I think it's amazing. Like Ahrefs, for example, like they introduced the ability to automatically create meta descriptions with ChatGPT, which okay, cool. But like, what about using all the link data that you have and applying some sort of AI technology there to suss out like I don't know key insights from the link graph of competitive sites or whatever? It seems like a much more strategic use of the data that they have. But I think we saw that a ton with when ChatGPT came out. Investors, stockholders, right? Everybody wanted to see some like element of AI involved in the tools. And so that was just sort of the easy add on. There wasn't really, it seems like a lot of strategic thinking about, okay, we could add this, but here's how to make it really valuable.
It seems to me if we know that vector embeddings are underpinning all of this, and you're crawling set of the web already, why would you not also create an index of vector embeddings and make that available to everybody? If we know that the relevance between a source and target document is something that Google is looking at very closely and has the ability to do so very easily now, why do we have no relevance metrics in our link data? The base level things that our space should have that we don't have. And so we have this whole subset of our industry that does like, Python SEO that is completely a function of the fact that our tools don't do enough.
Yeah, it's true. I will say, being in like the SaaS business, very different than the service. Well, I don't know. Maybe you could argue that's a little bit of service, but the maintenance and the costs involved with that is highly different. So totally get why that might not be something you want to take on.
Yeah,
But
for sure. But I mean, the crawling itself is already expensive. You know what I mean? And so like
yeah,
just
yeah.
running an additional operation, not saying that it's free, but you might as well because it is so valuable. And like why does it take me to say like, hey, vector embeddings are a thing and here's how you do it and here's why it's valuable and here's all the use cases. Like I shouldn't have to be the one that's defining that for an industry. That is like true in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like it shouldn't be me having to bring that back to our industry. And what I do love is that the more agile software providers, I mean, it's really only one, Screaming Frog, like they are adding these sorts of features consistently. And then what happens is, the other companies start to come in and be like, oh, well, everyone is using that. We need to have it too. So it seems like the pipeline is like I'm the industry's product manager. And then Screaming Frog says, that's a good idea. And then everyone else copies that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been playing around with some scripts too, and it's not hard. Like
No.
it's not hard at all. And then the insights that you get, you're just like, yeah, like this is great.
Yeah, it's super valuable. And like what we're talking about is scale, right? Obviously, it's going to cost them millions of dollars to do this, and I don't discount that, but it's like an absolute requirement at this point. We can't keep playing with like incomplete data when Google has continued to like make these quantum leaps ahead. Because otherwise, like, what are we actually doing? We're just like,
It's all very manual right now. I wonder if you find any value in like reverse engineering. You use ChatGPT. You ask ChatGPT something. You see the answers it provides. You try to understand why are those answers there. You reverse engineer from there. It feels like it's all very manual, but what else can you do without a tool set right now aside from trying to pick it apart yourself?
yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing is effectively reverse engineering, right? Like, so when SGE, the precursor to AIOs, was first announced, I didn't have access to it. So I was like, cool, well, let me figure out how I could build something that does this exact thing. And then I came across Llama Index, and then I basically like used like a SERP API to basically feed the results from a given query to Llama Index, where it basically vectorizes them, and then you have a prompt that says, answer this query with the information from these documents. And I got really close to what Google is actually doing. What I didn't know at that time was that they were looking at uh, all these synthetic queries, which we've learned as a function of this whole query fan out thing. So I think one of the wrong conclusions that I made early on in that proof of concept that I built was that, oh, you could rank like number 75 for this query and still be a part of the AI overview. I think what it was actually happening is that something that ranked number 75 for the query you put in might have ranked number 3 for one of the synthetic queries. And so I think that is what is one of the key insights. So going back to what we talked about earlier on this in this conversation, is building that matrix of keywords to figure out where are you ranking across that full keyword set, and then figuring out which components you need to optimize accordingly in order to appear in these different surfaces.
So is it fair to say that the hub and spoke model that was popular previously is sort of a way to get to that, right? Like you have a topic
Yeah.
and then you have all the subtopics around it, but there may also be these sort of adjacent topics that also now need to be included. And so you're just sort of building this, content hubs essentially.
Yeah, it's still to some degree topical clustering, but it's not necessarily going to be identifiable in the same way. Because I think when we talk about topical clustering, you're like, I have this core keyword, and then there's like, like let's say we're talking about Disney World planning, right? I know this is an example that SEMrush used. Disney World planning, and it's like, okay, what restaurants are at Disney World? Which rides do I want to get on? Like you have all this sort of stuff around the topic. But I think that because Gemini is generating these, it's not necessarily going to be queries that a user is already searching for. It could be queries that it just like comes up with based on that core query. So that's the key difference. And in fact, I found the patent for how they do the whole query fan out thing. One of the things that they do is they look at the pages that rank for the core keyword and they start extracting features from that. But then a lot of it is like, okay, what are the recent queries that the user searched before? What are the related queries? And then what are the implied queries? And I think the implied queries is going to be the one that's like not the standard stuff that we know from topical clustering.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I think it's hard to like give you a direct example right now, but like the point is that the large language model can generate a bunch of queries, based on the context that the user is in. So as an example, let's say, your location is New York and then you're talking about Disney World planning. Well, part of it will be like, well, what flights from New York do I need to get to Orlando? So that's not explicitly said, but it's informed by the other data points that they have about the user.
So I think very oftentimes when we think about like, content clusters or hubs or whatever term you decide to use, it's often sort of like the question answer format. Would this be an application of like a semantic triples approach where you're getting much more specific about like the keyword or the topic that you're covering to sort of align with maybe how LLMs better understand like context? Is that a reasonable way to think
Yeah,
about that? Or
yeah. Ultimately, what you do is still going to be, using semantic triples, structuring your content into like clear semantic units, so it's easy for these vector embeddings to be, precise, and using headings, things like that. But also, metadata is important, structured data is important, the topical clustering in general, because that's going to inform, broadly the ranking of the site. And so like content pruning is going to come into play. So some of the things that we already do mechanically as SEOs are still going to be important, but the aspect of reasoning is not something that we're really going to be able to control unless we are figuring out more technically like what are they doing. So I think there's going to be an aspect of Google retrieves, all these different chunks and what have you, but then they're going to re-rank them based on different considerations. And so figuring out what those elements, aspects might be is still going to require more than what we have in our SEO skill set.
It seems
It
like so
seems like
much of
so
it is
much
going
of
to
it
be
is going to be
personalized.
personalized.
We'll never
Yeah.
have access to that.
Right. So the personal context stuff, the historical queries, like all of that is something that we're not going to have direct access to. But I think that one of the things that all these SEO tool providers is going to have to do is start incorporating more clickstream data for a given keyword. What is that journey most likely to be? Like, what are users most likely searching for before and after, so that we can use that to inform our approach? Because yes, it is mostly going to be like a one-to-one environment, but user behavior, isn't so large, right? Like if you search for this before, you're looking for a mortgage, you're likely to search for this next, and so on and so forth. But the available data that we have and like, the people also ask may not be enough, because we do get those like those trees and graphs of the relationship between queries, but there's going to be a lot more long tail queries that may not be represented in there, because users are starting to understand that Google can understand a more complex query, and there may not be enough of those to build out those graphs in the way that we.
I mean, that's really fascinating. So if you took sort of like the user clickstream data, could you create a cohort of people and basically give them a task like, we want you to research how to get a mortgage. And then you basically just track all their collective searches.
Mhm.
There would probably be some sort of general theme that would emerge from there around those types of queries. Could you then sort of, I don't know if train a model is the right way to think about it, but could you then use that data to sort of build out content around it? Like, would that be one way to think about tackling this issue?
Yeah, I mean, and to some degree, that's what we already do, right? Like we build these journey maps, we align them to keywords, and then we say, okay, what content needs to be created at each of these stages. But my point here is that uncovering that data is going to be a lot more challenging. Like, yes, you can continue to do it broadly based on the keyword research data that's provided, but the point is that these environments are far more specific. So taking the broad approach may not be enough anymore.
Got it. I know we're bumping up against time here. Joe, any other questions you wanted to ask?
Um, I
I
mean,
do I do have a curiosity question. So I mean, it seems like the best way to get to what's actually happening would be to work internally, OpenAI or Google. Like, would that ever be in your future?
You know, it's funny. I was literally thinking about that. I said it out loud. We went to a couple of the buildings where the actual search engineers are, and I was like, yo, maybe it's time to like stop doing this. Maybe it's time to just like join the dark side and
Pull a Danny
like
Sullivan.
yeah, like be a part of building it, not just like on the outside trying to manipulate it. And I've gone back and forth on that idea for a long time because my background is computer science. I grew up just wanting to like build things, and maybe SEO is just like too small for me at this point, and maybe that is what I need to do. But right now I'm still having a good time, and I feel like this is like a real opportunity to put my stamp and my mark on what things are going to be moving forward. And I don't want to, lose that opportunity. But yeah, maybe like 3, 4 years from now, after I'm done with iPull Rank, maybe I do join like an OpenAI or Google or something like that and, work on building the future.
you got to stick with it one more year. This is going to be the most exciting year in decades, I feel like.
Yeah. No, I mean the last few years have been crazy, right? Like I started writing
Yeah.
my book. I don't know whenever I started writing my book, it was after a period where SEO had gotten pretty boring, right? Like there weren't any significant algorithm updates. It was just like, cool, we're chugging along, we're doing what we're doing, and then generative AI showed up, and it was like, okay, I'm awake again.
You had to add a
I
few
think it's
chapters to your plan for that book.
Oh my God. Yeah, this book was supposed to be 300 pages. It's 900 pages. Every time I'm like, okay, I'm done, something significant happens. So I've decided like this, I'm not doing any more after AI mode. Like this is it. Here's the book. Deal with it.
well. Listen, Mike. Before we let you go, we've started I guess we're trying to start a tradition on the show that gives our listeners a little bit something extra. We're calling it the Page Two Podcast Prediction, and I think we may have sort of touched on it already. But in 12 months from now, when you go to Google.com, like, what do you expect that experience to be?
Yeah, I expect the query box to be bigger, more like a text area rather than just like a input box. I expect it to default to AI mode or at least some like hybrid between what we're currently seeing and what AI mode looks like. And I expect it to be, a lot more multimodal, meaning that the results will be not just showing like videos and imagery and so on, also generating it in real time to give you, something very precise and personal to what it is that you're looking for. And I expect that, it's going to be a lot more like the movie Her, where it has all that information about you and it is very reactive to you specifically rather than giving more broad information.
Got it. And 0 clicks.
I mean, I'm gonna be honest. Like, I actually don't even click that much anymore. When I see an AI overview, I'm like, oh, that's all I needed.
Love it. Mike King, everyone. Thanks again for joining us on the Page Two podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next time.